yeah, just I guess it'd be good, important for the future also, so our processes around how we do these live streams, that any documentation should be pre-available for reading.
Well, I think if you follow the Zoom, you will be able to read it.
Alan, if they came into the chamber, they wouldn't necessarily be given a piece of paper that we had. So,
no. But what they will see is what we see when you live stream. So they'll actually see what you're seeing, which is the documents.
So this is all part of your protocol, ongoing protocol for holding Zoom meetings.
Yeah. You tell me when you're ready, Grace.
Yep, nearly there. Sorry, it's a bit slow.
That's all right.
Okay, so we're live streaming now, so you can carry on. I'll make you host.
Okay, put me back as host and we'll go with it.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Grace. Okay, everybody, as I said, welcome again. I think I've outlined how we intend on carrying on for the next hour and a half. So this stage, I'll hand it over to Roger McCullough and get Roger. And Roger, you'll know at what point you want to stop. So you just indicate to me that you'll stop at that point and take questions, and then I'll get you to take your screen down and we'll start the questions.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mayor Allen. Good morning, councillors, community board chairs, and anyone else on the call. Yep, look, I'll just share my screen and then I'll talk through exactly what we're going to do today. So, right, can you all hear me and see that all right? We going all right?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So, look, essentially, we've got a fair bit of material to cover today, but to begin with, on the 2nd of March and then the 17th of April, as councillors, you made it very clear to us that you'd like to see a few things, and those were the basics being done well and the delivery of essential services in a consistent, equitable and cost-effective manner across the district. You also suggested that we needed fit-for-purpose infrastructure that meets the needs of our diverse communities, and that the delivery of projects that were agreed to in the LTP that will help make our vision of livable, thriving and connected communities a reality. So that was pretty loud and clear. You also have suggested a few things that you think we could do to achieve that. And that's summarised here. So reviewing our capital expenditure project list in light of current strategies and the changing priorities we've got. And I'm referring there to things like blueprints and the spade ready projects that the government are asking us for in the stimulus packages. You've also suggested we ensure our asset management plans clearly reflect our new priorities and realign our spend to maximise the benefits to our communities. And the last one was to review the way we deliver our projects to ensure they meet community needs in a more timely manner. So that's what I heard quite clearly in the two workshops that we've had to date. So today's workshop, what we're looking at doing is explaining what we're doing to meet those expectations and clarify how it all feeds into the LTP process that we're in. And I'm going to do that under the 4 main headings. Now, those 4 headings are the same headings that were in the pre-read. Now, the pre-read was a very light document that just basically outlined the 4 areas that I would cover today. So for those who didn't see the pre-read, you're essentially looking at it now in points 1 to 4. So before I start, there's a few things. There are 4 sections, as you know. I'll pause at the end of each section and we can take questions through Mayor Allen at that point. There is a lot of material. Like, we've got about 36 slides to get through. So, you know, that's quite deliberate, because what we're doing here is we're trying to get everyone up to speed and with the same knowledge moving forward. And so we've got to do that through sharing information. So that's the primary purpose of today's session. And as a result of the topics that we cover, there will probably need to be further sessions where we dive into those topics in more detail and agree on some things. So we're not going to achieve everything today. This is the high level overview of what's going on, where the work-ons are, and we'll then kind of put more effort into refining those things with you in separate sessions as we need to. So from there, I will start the first section, which is what we do. So just framing this up, we're talking about delivery of services, and the main group in council that delivers services is the service delivery group. So I'm not talking about regulatory functions delivered by customer support, etc., etc. I'm looking at the service delivery worldview here. And so really, I just want to sort of outline what is business as usual and what do we mean by levels of service, and then how do we communicate that with our communities. And so that'll be the end of the first part where we can ask questions. So look, from the service delivery group's perspective, business as usual is outlined in the Local Government Act, Section 10. So provision of local infrastructure and local public services. And I've noted the main ones that you would recognise in your communities down there. There are a range of infrastructural assets and services that we run. Now, we've got to run those services and provide that infrastructure in a way which enables democratic local decision making and action by and on behalf of communities. So there's clear engagement needed when you're deciding what is business as usual. And it promotes the social, economic and environmental and cultural well-being of our communities in the present and in the future. So that's the general steer we've got about what is BAU. So if you then go on to say, well, what do we mean by levels of service? So the Local Government Act introduces this concept of service levels, and it requires council to apply them to all the activities that we carry out. So the LGA goes on to say that in your long-term plan, council must specify the service levels for groupings of activities that you're carrying out, what the specific performance targets and measures are going to be for those activities, and you've obviously got to estimate how much it's going to cost to deliver that level of service. And so that's all got to be in your LTP. Now, an important document that we use in this process to answer all of those three questions is the asset management plans and the various strategies that we develop. And they basically contain the parameters that we will be talking to our communities with during the whole LTP consultation process. So hopefully that's a fairly simplistic view of what do we mean by BAU, what do we mean by levels of service. So if we sort of dig a bit deeper, Waikato District Council's level of service, we've got 16 groupings of activities. I won't cover them all right this second, but they are available probably on our website, I imagine, or with our quarterly and annual reports. And there are 79 key performance indicators that we've set for those ones. Now, in terms of service delivery group, we're responsible for 7 of these groupings of activities, and those are the parks, the property and facilities, roading, solid waste, stormwater, wastewater, and water supply groupings. And there's 36 KPIs that fall under those 7 groups. Now, that's not the only place information is contained on the levels of service that we provide. They're also contained in contracts with some of our key delivery partners, such as, say, City Care or the Alliance. And also for the service requests that we receive, council have set internal deadlines of what's a reasonable time frame to respond to these service requests and provide the answers or the actions that our customers are asking us for. Now, when we do set these levels of service, it's really important for us to consider the needs and desires of our communities and have a look at that against affordability. And what I mean there is things like potholes. A customer might ring up and say, I've got a pothole out the front of my place, can you fix it? Council has a decision to make. Do we send a roading crew out there and then that day, the next day, to fix that one pothole? Or do we put it on a schedule of pothole fixes and send a crew out and do it more efficiently? Now, depending on which decision we make, it has implications on the cost of doing that fix. And usually when we do ad hoc one-off fixes, it costs significantly more than if we do things as a package of work. So those are the sorts of things we have to consider. The things like mowing our parks, how often we do it. There's significant cost every time we do it. So the more we do it, the more ratepayer money we're spending to do it. And we need to be very clear on why are we doing it at the frequency we're doing? Does it meet the community needs, etc. And things like street cleaning as well. There's a little story. Raglan was quite keen before every summer tourist season to get the main street steam cleaned. And so the community board rightly said, can we have it done sort of mid-December, getting town ready? Now, the long and the short of that one is every town has 2 steam cleans per year of their main street. They weren't programmed to do it in Raglan at that time. So the conversation was then, yep, we can do it now, but it means for the rest of the year, you're only going to get 1 clean. And for the reality is Raglan probably needs it done twice over the busy summer period. And that all has a cost. So we need to start thinking quite carefully about community needs, costs, and how we set up our levels of service. So then in terms of how we communicate all this, look, traditionally, I've got to be honest, we haven't done it well. We are trying to build that into the way we work now. And so that all starts with internally and operationally clarifying what do we mean by BAU and levels of service, and have we got that in a nicely presented format that's readable and understandable. We then need to do that next step saying, how much do we know about the costs of delivering those services in the way we are, and what are the cost benefits that we've kind of given up making the choices we've made. And look, the next couple of slides are some examples of some information we've provided to, in these cases, it's the Huntly Community Board. And I'll show you how we're trying to shape up that. It's a work in progress. But ultimately, if we can start sharing what BAU and levels of service looks like, we can have meaningful conversations about, do they meet community needs? Have we got our priorities right? And is there a reasonable way to pay for those services? So the last couple in this section is, here's an example of the district-wide business as usual / level of service stuff that roading does. So our Waikato District Alliance does a lot of these tasks. And there's actually more layers of information that sits in behind this as well, because they do break these things down into more detail. But as general categories, this is a starting point to say, what does BAU level of service look like? How often do we do it, etc. And I've got the same for, this is primarily the one provided by City Care and OCS who do cleaning. And so this one is specifically for Huntly. The last one was district-wide. And so we've got sort of lists and lists of information of what we do for each of our towns in varying degrees of information. And there's a few kind of complicated terminologies there, like LB4. You'll be saying, what does that mean? That's the way the contractor lists all the tasks it's trying to do. The key thing here is emptying rubbish bins, well, 52 times a year in LB4, which is that kind of area, etc., etc. So we need to get to the point of understanding this, sharing it, and having sensible conversations around, have we got it right? So if I now just jump out of sharing, that was section 1. And through you, Marielle, I'm happy to take any questions.
Cheers, thanks, Roger. It was actually a good explanation around level of service, and I know we do have that conversation every year, every LTP, but I think I've probably learned a little bit more from your presentation compared to others that I've seen, Roger. So really well done with that. Right, the first one I'll see up is Axel, so we'll go with Axel first.
Yeah, just a simple question, Roger, for with a follow-on after one of the next sections. Would it be true that most of the service delivery you've talked about now that the community is aware of and sees would be what's delivered through what we traditionally might be calling the parks team? And that's in fact also true by dollars now, more so than some of the capital works teams.
Sorry, I missed the essence of your question. I got distracted there for a second. Can you just repeat the essence of that?
The essence is it true that in fact parks probably deliver more capital works now than most other sections, perhaps excluding water care?
I'll answer that question in the very next section. No, it's not true, and I'll show you exactly why.
Thank you.
Thanks, Axel. The next two speakers, so they don't have to hold their hand up, is Jan and then Carolyn. Jan?
Yeah, thank you, Mary Ellen. Roger, there was a good summary, and what resonates for me are the things that you talk about: community needs and costs, and you talk about new priorities. And I think we're all very aware, and I hope this comes through in your further slides, of the change that we're experiencing and what we need to do to manage that. You talked in there about communicating the new BAU. And there are 2 points I want to make. One is that looking through all our surveys and looking at responses that I see, we're not managing our communications to meet community expectations. And that's generally because people don't care unless something affects them. I think we've all had that conversation before. And there's a philosophical conversation about, do we encourage people to care, or how do we manage that? The point I wanted to make, and I hope again that it comes up later, is the value of Blueprint and how that provided guidance to the community's aspirations and what they wanted. And they were simple things like integrated transport and social community walking and cycle trails, etc. So you've mentioned the things that we do. The roads, parks, water, rubbish, etc., etc. And those are the things that people like. Those are the tangible things that they can touch. I'm urging through this process that we take a really good note of what people have said in the blueprint and bring it in an innovative and agile strategy and communicate what we're doing, because I think as a council we're doing some fantastic work. We're not managing to communicate that in a way that people understand and how it touches them. So, but thanks for the intro, Roger.
All right. So just picking up on a couple of your points. So Jake's going to run a workshop with you on communication. Look, we've got to acknowledge that our communities need different communication to what we've provided in the past. There's got to be a lot of e-interactions. So, for example, it'd be wonderful if our communities could pull up on our website a map of their community, which outlined the levels of service or the things that they can expect to see happening in their community over whatever time period, etc. And it would be a way that we can really sort of highlight what we do in a real-time basis. So, yeah, definitely pick up all your points.
Cheers, thanks, Roger. Next one is Carolyn, Stephanie, and then Sean. Carolyn?
Thanks, Mary Ellen, and that was really clear and concise report, Roger. Just, I may be missing something quite obvious, but in respect of the level of service, and I understand how you've unpacked like the ranking and priority around the cost, but what I'm not hearing is how we factor in if there's any risk of harm or safety for those particular requests. For argument's sake, if we have a pothole or a footpath that somebody has tripped and fell, does that elevate its priority status?
Yeah, so look, yep, a few years ago there was a piece of work done where we didn't have the current service request system. We had CRMs, and that was the old name for service requests. And essentially at the time we went through and looked at all the requests we got. We categorized them. We worked with each of the business units to say, what do you think would be reasonable response times and why? And factored into what the response times should be was that whole public safety aspect as well. So, yep, it definitely was covered in there.
Cheers. Thanks, Carolyn. Right, up to Stephanie.
With COVID-19, are you going to find that the level of service will change, as in street cleaning and toilet cleaning, and are you factoring that in?
Look, I would expect so, yeah. I think you're quite right. things will change. Exactly how, that's a work in progress. You know, I think the issue we've got here is what's an immediate concern for the next 3, 6, 12 months, as opposed to the LTP talks about the next 3 years. So it's going to be quite an interesting journey for us to work out where are permanent changes required and what are the temporary changes just to get through sort of temporary issues. So good question, and I think we'll all need to work our way through that one.
Cheers, thanks, Stephanie. Just so we know where we're going, Stephanie, Sean, Dorothy, and then Jackie. Sean.
Good morning, all. Yeah, great report. I think you'll find the community boards will be quite interested to see those when they're all in a good draft or whatever it is. I think it'll be, I guess we'll see a lot of the perception of those levels of service. So just really keen to feed back into that document. So thank you.
Yep, no, that's fine. Hey, look, so talking to David White from Huntly, he's the one that most recently has asked for this information. We had a request, as I mentioned earlier, from the Raglan Community Board last year for it, and we managed to cobble something together. We've given David, again, something cobbled together, but we've given a commitment to try by the end of this financial year, so the end of June, to come up with a slightly more holistic, comprehensive window into levels of service across the district that all community boards can have a look at. It is a bit of a piece of work, and this COVID last 6 weeks has possibly jeopardised that time frame because it involves our IT team, a whole range of teams across the business, but it's definitely something we're trying to do.
Cool, thank you.
And I've got you, Sue, so you can put your hand down. Right, our next one is Dorothy.
Hi, thank you. Hi, everyone. Roger, my 2 questions, and one is about the affordability of what is actually going on in and around the areas in our communities. The mapping idea is a good idea, but my concerns are, I know you've got budgets to meet, and I understand that. How and what provisions are you doing for any new developments? Like there's walkways that's been created and there's new developments going on in most districts. So with the mowing and these paths and parks as well, who's going to actually do that? And the city care, is it going to be included in city care or other people or contracts that's going to actually happen? And has it been, you know, like going forward, have you made allowances for what's going on in the districts at the moment?
So I touch on that point later on through this presentation. Ultimately, our asset management plans and our strategies outline that sort of thing. So it talks about, the strategies talk about where our walkways are, what level of service we want to provide, etc. And it does look at new ones that are coming online and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
I think, look, Mayor Allen, this is section 1 out of 4. And I must admit, this is actually probably the lightweight stuff. This is pretty high level. There's some really punchy stuff to come that talks about our CAPEX, our projects, and I think the value for everyone is in some of that other material. So I think if we can just be conscious of that before we front load this meeting.
Cool.
Yeah, look, so, and I think that's an interesting point, Roger. So trouble is now we're actually talking about detail, which comes up in the next part of it. So look, I've got 2 others here. So Jackie and Sue, so do you want to ask your question now or be first up next time round? Jackie, respond.
Now would be good. Just 2 quick parts. I think there's really good
one
point
part, Jackie only.
Yeah. So I think it's good that information flow between the community boards. If one person asks for something, or it's critical that you actually share it, or like the government have done, and actually disclose all the information, because one person asks for information, it's likely that others are. So if we just put it out once, then people can use as reference material. That's one way of sharing information faster and more transparency. My question is, I love those information that you gave us around the contracts. So without going into the detail, my question is, even if it's for later, is done a comparative analysis of the level of service and contracts and the delivery of those services with all of the towns, all of the wards and rural areas, to ensure that we've actually got a consistency of our spend and level of service throughout those contracts, throughout our wards and areas?
look, that's a message that's been coming through loud and clear, is consistency across the district. So yeah, we need to do that moving forward, absolutely.
So we haven't got that piece of information, that we don't do that yet?
No, so that's really something we're going to have to run out through this LTP process as we're developing the asset management plans. You need to map what's in current contracts we've got with our main service providers compared to what levels of service communities are telling us they need and want, and just try and work out what can we achieve in the budgets that we've got.
Sure, yeah, because obviously there's a perception, whether it's fact or not, but I have a feeling from what you're saying is that it could be part of that will be factual, that there's a perceived difference, obviously difference along contracts and different suppliers, but also in different spaces, in different wards. So you know, we look forward to that. I think it's important that we understand that as council for governance decisions, as well as our communities. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Well, look, we'll have one more question and then we'll get Roger to go to the next section. Otherwise, we will completely run out of time. Sue.
Hi, everybody. It's very, very quick, but I think that's really, really good philosophy. And in terms of community boards asking questions, I think it's going to cut a lot of those things out, because there will be like a Bible and a reference point. So that's all I want to say.
Yep.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah. Okay, Roger, if you want to share with us on screen your stage 2, and we'll move into that.
Okay, so this section's another four subparts. So what does our Forward Works program actually look like? How projects are managed. I think whole of life project costs, it's something that's often forgotten, but we need to just remember, and I'll talk a bit about that. And then again, whether the blueprints fit in and new initiatives. So look, this is a graph and a table that all councillors will recognise. It comes through Stratton Finance on a regular basis, and there's a lot of questions that it raises. And so the next few slides are going to show what's in behind this, that operationally I see and work with my managers to manage. So the first thing I'd like to note is a lot of information, sorry about that. Essentially what you've got there is a list of all our capital work programs across council, and all of them except the information management. So this is the table on the bottom there. The information management, that's basically IT. The rest of it sits in service delivery. So the next few slides will unpack the service delivery component of this. So look, I have recently got these reports. I've been working with finance for the last wee while on how can I get a better view of the situation, and how do we manage this moving forward. So this is relatively new ways of reporting, and I'm happy to share it with you. So just actually, I'll jump back one. This one here excluded the vested assets. So you'll see at the bottom there, you had a full year budget of 157 mil. This one here, my approach is let's start with everything. And so that's including your vested assets. And so we've got basically a total budget of 205 million for service delivery to deliver in this financial year we're currently in, that we only have another 1 or 2 months to deliver. So responsibility for those chunks of money are very clear. The interesting features are the blue bits on the graph there are the work that was set for this year. That's the annual plan stuff. The red stuff is stuff we've brought forward from previous years where we haven't done it. So what that's done is it's doubled our workload, and we're constantly trying to catch our tail, and we're actually not succeeding in that respect. The green parts is then when we chuck some more stuff on because we've come up with a good idea or there's new funding to do something else. So we further make the problem, we make it worse. Now, in terms of vested assets, for those who aren't aware of them, vested assets are things that other entities deliver in our communities that ultimately council and the ratepayer still needs to fund, and we need to accept them. And there's a process called the vesting process there, which is the way council has a good look at what we're being given to say, is it a good enough quality? Does it stack up? Do we actually want it? So that's what the vesting process is, really critical process. And just before we get too far, and we could go into finances for the next wee hour or two, we don't have 205 million sitting in the bank in this big pot of cash because we haven't spent stuff in the past. A lot of this is loan funded. And so at the time in the LTP, when we set each of these items, we generally say, if we're going to deliver a $10 million project, we'll need to borrow $10 million. So in terms of our LTP, which actually budgets out the next 10 years, where are we going to borrow it in year 1, 2, 3? And what is the repayment schedule over the rest of that time going to look like? So it's not as though we're just sitting on a whole bunch of cash and you know, we're earning lots of interest on that, because that's not how it is. We just haven't drawn down the loans, etc. Alison probably can give a broader explanation, but I just want to keep kind of this at a high level at the moment, talking about broadly what does the CAPEX budget and program look like. So ultimately, including vested assets, 205 million. Let's strip out the roading vested assets. And when I talk about the things I'm stripping out, there's essentially the Huntly bypass is valued at about $40 million or so. And so we include that on our books because essentially the day we inherit that asset from NZTA, we'll have the value of a $40 million asset on our books, and we need to start depreciating and maintaining, etc., etc. So let's strip out the roading because they're not in our direct control. This graph includes the water's vested assets. The reason they're included here is because the Te Kaupara Housing Infrastructure Fund, it's externally funded, but actually we're still responsible for delivering it. And then there's some slightly more minor sums, the 6 mil and the 7 mil, where developers are going to deliver the stuff for us, but it's just for ease, hasn't been split out. So simplistically, this graph is showing us that we have 102 mil controlled capital expenditure we're supposed to do this year, and there's 103 million that's uncontrollable. And I know that word, whenever it's on a graph, kind of raises questions. What do you mean uncontrollable? It's all about who's delivering it and who's actually influencing what happens in that space. So once again, if I go down further, the next level. The water care projects, pretty much the Water Governance Board has visibility of what's happening in the water space. So for my direct line of sight and my managers, I've stripped that out for the purposes of this exercise. But we now know exactly what sits on the plate of each of my managers, and it's around about 79 mil worth of projects. And we've now got a really good understanding of what makes up that 79 million, who particularly is responsible for it. So not just managers, not just team leaders, but down to a project manager level, where it came from. So whether it's in the current year of the LTP, whether it's a carry over from previous years, etc. When was it due to be delivered? How much is in the bank to spend on it? And how much, if any, we've already spent on project management, etc. And we're now forming a more realistic view on what we can actually deliver and when that can happen. So this one shows where we're at kind of year to date. And what it's saying is we think we're going to spend 46 mil this year and carry forward 36 mil next year out of that full 79 mil budget. And you might look at that and go, my goodness, that feels low. This graph here shows the blue line is the budget we set this year. So after you take out your vested assets, you've got your 157 odd mil that we said, and that's the blue line at the very top. The light blue line, the average capital spend one from 2015 to now, shows that we only have ever delivered around about 45 million worth of CAPEX. That's how we've set up our business to operate. So we've got a bit of an issue here where we keep saying we're going to do more than we actually can. So the 46 that we think we're going to deliver this year, that's after some of the COVID last 6 weeks stuff's been taken into account. It might be optimistic, might not. We actually thought we might get to about 49 mil this year. But actually those numbers are relatively meaningless when you look at, we've been committed to delivering 157 mil. So that's the issue that we've got in front of us at the moment. So the big question is, how do we improve the situation? Well, we obviously need to increase our project delivery capabilities. So 46 mil a year is not good enough. We need to review our CAPEX program to be more realistic. We need to stop taking on more than we can deliver. And we also need to be realistic and stop making promises that we just can't keep. So that's pretty simplistic, but that underpins the things that we need to do moving forward. So now project management, each of those CAPEX budgets is made up of a whole bunch of different things. And each of them are projects. And so a little bit of time just explaining what we do with projects in council and then how it all bolts together. So we established a project management office, a revised project management framework, a project governance group, and a community projects team back in 2018-19 when we reviewed how we were operating. The PMO, it generally looks at the internal projects on how we rebuild the business, the council business, to get it working as we need it to. The project management framework, it's generally all good organisations need a framework which it runs projects through to ensure they're managed consistently and you get the right outcomes that you're after. The project governance group, it's generally the executive that oversees all of the projects that are happening in council, the progress on them, whenever there's issues with them, tries to work through those, the recommendations that are put to that group. And the community projects team, that's an interesting one. And I'll sort of, I'll explain kind of how it works. Most of the projects sit in the roading space and the reserves and facilities space. The community projects team actually don't own any projects. What they do is they're like a consulting arm where the roading team or the parks team says, I've got a playground to deliver. You're full of project managers that know how to deliver these things most effectively, efficiently. Can you do it for us? So that's how that all kind of bolts together. But they also rely on a whole bunch of other teams across council to successfully deliver that work. And so you've got the procurement team who help set up the tendering processes. You've got the contracts team that when you actually enter into a contract needs reviewing. You've got zero harm and legal and finance that all feed into making a project successful. So it's a multidisciplinary cross-team approach that is quite complicated, and we need to get that all working well. So ultimately, we need to review what we're doing and start getting different and better outcomes in that whole space. So I think it was probably at least a year, maybe a year and a half ago, that you councillors said to me, can you please give me a list of all the projects on your books and when you can expect to deliver them? And what I found when I tried to answer that question is we've traditionally operated on multiple lists, and those lists have sat in the teams who have owned the projects. And they've all been in different formats, and it's been really difficult to land that all in one place. So late last year, we did manage to get a master consolidated spreadsheet, and it was based on the last LTP financial model. And look, it's taken us a wee while to understand it, unpack it, and work out how does the different teams who need access to the information use it. Some teams need to write comments, status updates of the projects. You need forecasting from budgets, etc. That spreadsheet's been really unwielding. It's about 1,700 lines or so, and there's about 215 projects outlined on it, which it's very difficult for us to summarise it, share it, or do anything meaningful with it. And we're really working hard to find out how can we boil it down to not even 215 lines, but some other way of communicating to yourselves, our key stakeholders, through other dashboards as to what are we working on, what's the progress, where have we come up with issues and what are we doing to solve them. So there's a fair bit of work happening in that space. We haven't landed it all yet, but we are making good progress. And look, our ultimate vision there would be something where, our communities can go online, look at their local neighbourhood and hover over a project symbol on a map, and it would say exactly what's planned in that space, when it's planned, and what status it's at, for example. And there's been some prototyping of that work done. So it's very doable. Other councils do it. We're just working on making it a reality in our business, given some of the constraints we're working through from an IT point of view. So that's a bit of a snapshot into all of that. I guess, what's the next one? If I now just move into whole of life costs for assets. Ultimately, before we decide to take on infrastructure, and I think there was a question earlier on about this, or we take on an asset, we've got to know what it's going to cost us for the life of that asset. So there's a definition there of what whole of life costs really mean. So it's the total cost of owning that asset over its entire lifespan, from when you first purchase it or build it to when it's had its useful life and you dispose of it. And what we're learning is a lot of assets come with a lot of hidden costs. Low impact urban design, that's a really good way of dealing with stormwater in a sustainable, environmentally friendly way. But in all reality, they're very expensive systems to construct, maintain, and then replace. And replacement, they need replacing, or the media needs replacing quite regularly. So there's some trade-offs that if we decide we want to be environmentally friendly and use low impact urban design, we've got to be clear about what are the cost implications of doing that. At the moment, we have developers putting all these good ideas in front of us, but we don't really have sustainable ways of funding some of those good ideas. And the same with, if we accept large parks, reserves, walkways, you've got to say, how do you maintain them in an equitable manner? And that's where you look at whether it's district-wide rates, whether it's, you got to look at funding mechanisms, who's benefiting from what you've put in. And again, having quality asset management plans, careful analysis of the development proposals, and having ongoing conversations with key stakeholders through this whole life cycle of an asset helps you achieve that balance that you're looking for. Last bit in this section was around blueprints. So look, the work we've done with blueprints in our communities, that's been a great success. It's been fantastic. And essentially the blueprints contain a range of initiatives and projects that will help define each of our communities and make them more livable, thriving and connected. So that will achieve our vision. But at the moment, and I think it was made quite clear during the blueprint process, that they're not in the current LTP. So they'll need to be considered and prioritised along with all of our current CAPEX projects as we move forward in this next LTP. And I suppose, look, we know we've got funding constraints. We generally want to do more than we can with the money we've got. And we've also got project delivery constraints that we've talked about. So we'll need to work pretty closely together with our communities to say, how could we deliver more? So are there other funding sources? And there's already work going on in terms of working with community groups to find alternative sources of funding. And we're hearing a lot about communities wanting to deliver projects as well. So we need to leverage off those opportunities. Haven't got the answers yet. So that's the end of that little section. Another whirlwind trip. Sorry about that. I'll stop sharing and we'll jump out of that.
Thanks for that, Roger. Now have a drink of water and take a breath, because you did very, very well with that, I've got to say. Sitting here this morning, I was just thinking, man, when's Roger got to stop? But you did really well, so well done. First hand I noticed up here was Noel and then Sue.
Thank you, Alan. Roger, I really appreciate those comments, and if I can say, the honesty that you share with us is a revelation, so thank you. And that just leads me into my concern. You talk about the delivery of 50 odd million as opposed to an aspiration of 150. I think this comes down to a need for an honest conversation with the community. If that's the case, do we need a complete reprioritisation of the program, COVID aside, and therefore, if so, then we may need to set a policy on our staff to get on and develop the likes of the floating lines from days gone by. So, and you commented on the blueprints right at the end, Roger. So I see the success of the blueprint programming assisting us going forward with the long-term plan, and we keep getting bumped, but I think we are finally going to have a meeting with Blueprints Committee on Monday to try and get some more traction. But I think the way we looked at our communication and the engagement, the community fed back at that last survey, the higher level of engagement they felt during that period, the Blueprints consultation. So that was a model that we could certainly utilise. So I think my main point here is, do we really need an honest conversation with the community that we've been over promising and under delivering? So what can we deliver? You've alluded to that. So I challenge my fellow councillors and perhaps even the community boards, let's be realistic. And I think we need to reprioritise completely and then ask the community what it is that is their priority. Thank you. There was a question in there probably, but that's, yeah.
So Noel, if I could just comment on that one, I think so there's recovery planning happening at the moment, which is what does council life and business look like in this new world of COVID-19? And yesterday at the session, you heard about the built environment, and Megan and Sarah, who are running that work stream, talked about trying to pull together all of the different projects, CAPEX initiatives on our plate, whether they be the spade ready government stuff, whether they be blueprints, whether they be what's on our current plate, and having to apply a different lens to all of that. So there is definitely work going on, which we need to bring all of you in on to say, okay, how do we reprioritize this? What is the lens we have to put over all of this? What are the criteria we now use moving forward to get the right things done at the right time? So, yep, I agree with you fully, Noel.
Well, perhaps the question, look, thanks for those comments, Roger. If I may, Alan, where do we go from here is probably the question. Is the ability of council to do things into the future. Our community, we know there's unemployment, we don't know what level that's going to get to. The affordability, is it time to actually in the LTP say, let's step back and say, should we be focusing on core activity only for a short period rather than doing the aspirational things? That's counterproductive to the blueprint program. So these are questions that we all have to do. And obviously on a format such as Zoom, it's difficult to have those conversations with others unless we all start ringing around. So, yeah, there's more questions probably than answers. So thank you for your presentation.
Can I just say before I go to Sue, just on the comment you've made here, Noel and Roger, I think in relation to the projects, I think it's pretty clear that we've got responsibility to deliver on the projects that need to be done to facilitate better outcomes like wastewater, water, and particular roading projects. They always need to sit ahead of aspirational stuff like a new playground, a new toilet, or something like that. So there is, in my mind, there is two lists. There's a list that we must do to meet certain, whether they be regulatory requirements or whatever, or safety requirements, versus the other list, which is what you probably referred to, Noel, as the floating list of aspirational stuff that sits over to the side.
Yeah, it needs a wider conversation, Alan. So thanks.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Okay, I've got Sue and then Axel. Microphone, Sue.
Sorry, just a quick question about the ageing water pipes and stormwater pipes that we started a conversation about a couple of years ago. Is our responsibility in terms of the Waikato District Council area factored into those project CAPEX things that you were talking about, or is that a completely separate issue again?
No, so we do, that graph did have the waters, one of the graphs had the water stuff in it, and if I just recall it, the general trends there, we had roading of 105 million worth of CAPEX, waters was 73 mil. So whatever works have been factored in terms of pipe replacements, etc., will be in that 73 million. Just the delivery vehicle now has changed in terms of water care, project managing and delivering those from a practical perspective.
I was just wanting to in my head to because I knew those were huge numbers and they could be hugely important if they fail. So I just wanted to get a feel that that was covered. And the other question I had is, why is Waikato District Council responsible for the Huntly bypass?
So look, ultimately, we had the old state highway, and then they built a new one. And what happens when they build a new one? They give the local authority the old one, and it becomes it becomes a local road.
So it's the local road we're talking about, not the new bypass road.
So it's a process we call reification, Sue. So every section of the what was State Highway 1 and will be also 1B through to Cambridge will come back under council control. So it's about 100 kilometres of road in total, I think, will come back, and that's what Roger's referring to.
Understand. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Sue. Right, Axel and then Chris.
Yeah, Roger, my apologies. After 6 weeks at home, I think I'm losing my edge and a little bit slower on the uptake. So I'm just going to ask my first question again. But this time I'm going to ask you for my clarity, please, could you frame your answer of no in light of your slide 2.11, which seemed to suggest that community connections, in fact, is the largest area at which CAPEX is delivered other than roading and waters? Thank you.
2.11. So, okay, so looking at the graph, and I could share it again. Ultimately, community connections, they've got an annual plan and a carry forward budget. So their total budget is 7.6 mil. And so those are the projects that actually are most visible to our community. So I'd have to agree with you there. You've then got roughly another 6 mil, which community projects have been given. Now, community projects have actually been given a lot of community connections ones. So there's round about 20 odd mil, just over, that are in the parks facilities space. So I think from a meaningful community point of view, that's a really important part of our business. The roading stuff, who obviously they've got large CAPEX budgets, but it's not so visible on a daily basis. And then again, the waters has a fair chunk of that. So I think from community perspective, you're probably right, Axel.
And I dare say, from as general manager in this area, you've then got the resources available from a project management point of view to deliver those projects in that community space, as opposed to roading, which is taken care of by the Alliance, or water, which is under care, water care.
Yep, good question. So in our restructure, when we created the community projects team, we actually took out of the community connections team the project managers. We grouped them in a specialist centre of excellence for managing and delivering projects. That's Paul McPherson's team. What I've recently kind of, when I've delved into this in more detail, there are still projects sitting in Megan's area and out with consultants, etc. And in terms of the roading space, there is some at the Alliance, there is some with private consultants, and there is some in the community projects team. So we now have a really good visibility of where they all sit and what we're doing to try and deliver them. Our next challenge is saying we're not as efficient in that space as we need to be. What are we going to do differently? And again, this built environment work, the recovery planning work, is having a look at that exact question. Is there a more efficient model out there? The last section that I talk about in this presentation today is a little bit about how do we get value for money and what we've been doing to try and solve some of the problems that we're talking about now.
Okay, thanks for that. Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. Find it very informative, very well presented, and yeah, lots of information coming out. So what I want to focus in on is the fact that we're not delivering. Is that because of a bottleneck? Is there an area in our business, or is it just far too much work that we just can't get through? because the other issue is our district's growing and this problem is going to get worse. And I'd just like to know how we're going to solve it. Thanks.
Yep, that's $1 million question. Hey, look, we probably 2 years ago changed the way we operate as a council. We came up with our new vision of thriving, connected, livable communities, and we changed the way we try and do business with our communities. So this very next section is about co-design and how we kind of work with our communities to deliver outcomes. And what we found is it takes a lot longer when we actually work together to try and deliver stuff. So that's one of the issues we've had. There's also a range of problems around constraints in the construction industry. So some of the tenders we're putting out, we're just not getting any quality tenders in. So it's really hard to deliver something if no one wants the work that you're trying to get done, etc. And it's usually quite specialist work. So look, there's a whole range of fixes there. We are working on what does that all look like and what can we do differently to get some better outcomes.
So maybe before I go to Jackie, just to help you with that, Chris. So when it comes to a point Roger raised around not getting good enough prices or tenders come back through the tender box, I know some of our contractors that work in both in the area of roading and subdivision and stuff like that, where we would potentially use them as a contractor for us in this situation, chose last year not to tender for any more council work because they had too much work of their own. This is part of the problem that we had probably, if I go back in memory, probably 8, 9, 10 years ago, I think, if memory serves me right, where we had a similar situation until the GFC came along, and then all of a sudden we were getting a lot of tenders come in. So maybe this will actually help refocus some of those contractors and sharpen up their pencil also around that pricing going forward in the future. Right, Jackie.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, Roger, I'd like to acknowledge the really good work that you particularly have done in this space, because this is a critical area, as we've discussed, and your team. These concerns that you've outlaid, and as really simply and transparently as possible to us, have been showing for like many, many years in terms of asset management or the lack of it, understanding our assets, the difference between what we budget and want to do as opposed to we're actually delivering over many years, and where all those projects are. The communities that have been waiting for, through the LTP, waiting for their projects happily and patiently in line for 3 years, it always carried forwards. And also, these forward aspirationals, being overlaid with the really good work around the blueprints to overlay those, that groundwork and consult. So you have done a really exceptional job in your team. So I just acknowledge you for that. The main concerns which I've highlighted to you, and around those finances, it shows in the finance, the reporting you've touched on, I think it's really important that we have that transparency, the mapping of our projects, all good stuff. But the carry forwards are a real concern, particularly in the communities that I'm aware of where they've been waiting or they've been late, or even things like we want to purchase land in strategic areas but we haven't been able to or haven't done, even though we promised to do it in our LTPs. All of these things mean that now the carry forwards and the projected budgets against those with inflation means that they're actually not affordable now or not available. So there's a lot of concern in the North Waikato, particularly around these overdue projects, late ones carried forwards, and how we then put that in with COVID and with the LTP and affordability and blueprinting. So just flagging, I know you're well aware of it, but I think it's really good work, but there is some quite concerns that the patience of a lot of people around levels of service and the expectation something will change. It's really good to get that as soon as possible around that transparency so we understand and have input into that.
Yep, agree with everything you're saying, and the conversation moving forward has to turn to how do we address some of the historic issues and do things better moving forward, and where we have legitimate delivery issues, we've just got to have a conversation as to, is it still appropriate to try and deliver this? If it's not, where should we be focusing our attention? And the ones that we do deliver, let's make sure we do it well and do it right.
And on time. Yeah, fantastic. Good
all
work.
Right, I got Alan Granger down the bottom. There you go, Alan.
Yeah, just picking up on Jackie's point, I'm obviously reasonably new to the Pocono Community Committee, but have taken interest in it before I got on the committee is, Roger, the number of drawings for the same project by different consultants, and then nothing happens, and that's what I can't quite understand. I come from a background of building retail supermarkets, and you know, once something gets on the plans, it goes ahead, but we seem to, you know, be spending money on, oh, we'll get this done, and then we bring in another consultant and they move the goalposts, and nothing happens. So hopefully in your review, that something like, you know, particularly in Pocono, that the town square has been promised for maybe 8 years and it's still going nowhere. Thank you.
Look, in terms of the very next section of this presentation, talks about what's co-design, and iterative design results in multiple copies of the same picture with small tweaks, and sometimes it's appropriate and sometimes it's not. You actually just need to make a decision and all abide by what we've agreed. And so yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that in this next part.
Okay, so I think we will move on at this stage, Roger. I've got no other speakers, and I think we need to keep going in the essence of time.
Okay.
Mayor Allen, Gabrielle has had her hand up for quite a while.
I can't see Gabrielle. She's not on my screen.
Oh, sorry. She did have a number of waves.
Yeah, well, I don't see them. I'm sorry. Gabrielle needs to actually, if you are off screen and you want to be heard, you need to demute yourself and speak up. And unfortunately, I only see 25 on the screen, and I know there's 36 watches, and I can't pick up on those unless they make a noise. It doesn't come onto my screen.
Got that? I'm making a noise now, but that was good to know because I didn't know that, so I was waving and like making, you know.
Yeah. Sorry, Gabrielle. I always love to see you, but I can't see you today.
Well, I thought that too, and I was like, come on, what's happening here?
I'll wave back to you, Gabrielle. Cheers.
Thank you. Oh,
Okay. Okay, Roger.
Okay, so section 3 is all about what's the role of the community in project design and delivery. And there's two main elements to this part. One is what is co-design and how does it help deliver on our vision? And the second part there is how can community boards help to deliver projects? So, look, ideally, council and our communities will be working closely in partnership, identifying projects, the capital spend that we need to make needed in their communities. We'd be prioritising them, and we'd be agreeing on the work program and the funding sources and almost delivery mechanisms. And we've been talking about that probably for the last half hour or so. And for specific projects, there might be a different level of co-design, a little bit more in-depth working together on exactly how it's built, how it looks, how it functions, etc. And working out, again, how to deliver them most appropriately. And we need to get to the point where we're jointly celebrating the success of the things we deliver and learning from those issues that are encountered. And I'm not sure if we've done that well in the past because there's been all sorts of issues, but if we haven't talked about what's gone wrong and how to avoid them in the future, sometimes you repeat it. So look, about 18 months ago, when I first came into the service delivery part of the business, we were talking, the new vision was kind of evolving. We were talking about what does co-design really look like? And I worked with a few people on what could it look like? And so this was something that we needed to workshop at some point in time. Now is a good point of showing it to you. It is a work in progress. I suppose it's based on sound project management principles. So in the world of projects, you've got two major schools or philosophies. One is Prince 2 and the other is the IPM, International Project Management. And they have different ways of managing projects, but there's some similarities. And this draws on best practice, managing projects, but working with your key stakeholders at the right point in time, making the right decisions and having the right hold points through the life cycle of, is it just a good idea or is it a good idea that's worth progressing fleshing out and going through the formal approval steps to actually say, yep, we're committed to doing this. We know how we're going to fund it. We know how we're going to go through procurement. We know how we're going to deliver it. And this tries to encapsulate that. Now, there's a lot there. I appreciate that, and I don't expect you all to read it and understand it right this second. And as I said, we may well want to have another session on this stuff. But ultimately, for a year and a half ago, it was probably a bit ambitious. We were still trying to create the teams. The community projects team was only a new team, so they hadn't actually formed as a team and worked out how they were going to operate within the business, etc. We had a lot of other things going on, so it was probably a bit early for it. But ultimately, staff did take on the principles that are embodied in that piece of work, and they did start trying to implement them. And so co-design is something that we're all keen to do, but we've kind of learned some things. You can't just go out to a community and ask what they want, because you're probably going to end up with a whole bunch of expectations and desires that don't line up with what was envisaged in our LTP or funded. And there's some examples of that. You also need to include the right people at the right time. And when you don't do that, things go quite badly wrong. And again, we've seen some examples of that. And you need to follow a framework, because you need approval gateways, whether it's from a funding point of view, from a community acceptance point of view, etc., etc. So there's some disciplines there that maybe in the eagerness of trying out a new co-design methodology, didn't go so well for us. And so this next part here, there's been some wins and we've had some failures, and we've got to accept that. Takramata toilet, there's a really nice graphic wrap around that toilet, which for me is a really nice example of how a community has worked with council to achieve a look and feel that works for this community. Tamaheri Playground, another great example of where community aspirations didn't line up with council's LTP budgets and aspiration. And so Tamaheri wanted a destination playground, and they worked to find different funding vehicles to make up the difference. And they worked with council's projects team to deliver on something a little bit special and a little bit different. Huntley Hall had a really awful start. Ultimately, for me, that's been an example where we've empowered the community, or the community have taken power and actually achieved some good things there. Now, we've got some examples where it didn't go so well, and I don't need to say too much to Councillor Church about the Turkau toilets and the length of time it's taken to replace the one that burnt down. And that's probably an example where there were too many conversations and no decisions made in terms of where it was going to be and what it was going to look like, and there may have been multiple plans, etc. Centennial Park down here in Ngarawahia, there was the staff went out and talked to the local sports group and said, okay, you're the primary user of this park, what do you need? And they came up with a changing room and a sports storage area, etc., etc. Reality is, in our LTP, we had a 2-pan basic toilet setup funded. So when we designed and then got priced what the community needed, there was a massive mismatch, and that raises expectations and causes issues for us. Same with the Whara Community Centre. If you don't take all the key stakeholders along the way, you sometimes come a cropper. And in this case, I think we're trying to achieve a lot of things with that project. And I'm not sure if we've done a great job of bringing all stakeholders along on the journey. And now at the end of the process, when we're trying to get consent, we're finding not everyone's on the same page. So look, co-design is a tricky thing. We need to work together in a more streamlined way. And we sort of need to clarify, what do we actually mean by co-design? It may be that we have a standard design for toilets across our district and say, this is what is value for money in terms of the design of a toilet block. And this is what each community will get, unless we need to work with that community to say there are other sources of funding or there are other ways of delivering a different outcome. because this is part of our problem. We've got 215 projects. If we try and bespoke design every toilet block in the district, we'll spend 6 months delivering 6 toilets rather than some of the other projects that communities may prefer to see delivered as well as. So next slide, we've got, you know, how can we engage with our communities differently? We're well aware that some of the community boards and community committees out there are really keen to help deliver projects. And look, others aren't, just varying levels of interest, capability, time, enthusiasm, etc. And that's not a reflection on them. But we've already talked about how some projects have been successful, some haven't, when we've worked with key stakeholders and community and boards and committees. But what we have learned, it's not that simple as it first appears. And this is where we need to get real with our conversation with all our stakeholders. There's some structures of entities is quite important when funding's applied for and you need accountabilities for various things. Procurement obligations, we all need to meet them, whether we're council, whether we're a community committee, community board, or some other entity. If we're operating in this public space, we need to follow those various rules, and there's a section later on about procurement. Record keeping, audits, that's all really important stuff. It kind of sounds a bit dry, but again, it's really important to get the right outcomes and to make sure that the process is as robust as it needs to be. And look, in terms of the bottom line, health and safety, looking after community board members, contractors, members of our community, etc. We have to get that right, irrespective of who does the work. There's huge liabilities there, but ultimately we just want to keep everyone safe. So it isn't as simple as it first appears, but we are committed to working through how we can come up with models where we involve the community, we empower the community, and we deliver these things differently to what we've done in the past. So again, I'll jump out of share mode and we can answer questions.
Cheers, thanks for that,
I've got some
Rob.
things I'd like to say. If you can't see me here, Mr. Mayor.
Gabrielle, I was just going to offer you the first spot. You jumped in really quick and you're in the dead center of my screen, so the floor is yours. And then followed by Axel.
I'm just trying to do what I'm told, like be noisy or something.
Yeah, no, you did well, Gabrielle.
I didn't actually want to interrupt you. I don't like interrupting.
That's all right.
I'd just like to share first, and sorry to bring this in if it's annoying for people, but just wanted to let you all know that some about 8 beautiful orca whales were in the Whaingaroa Harbour this morning. They came to visit us and to feed, and me and the kids went down and they were within about probably 6 meters away. So just wanted to share that with you all, that and I had a real sense that, you know, coming into this LTP meeting with you and planning and everything, that you know, it's the natural environment and the people that are the most important. And I know that council is a lot about you know, the things like roading and everything, which seems a bit more dry, but just really, I felt that really strongly, that, you know, the work that we're all doing really, you know, at the end of the day should be about caring for each other and for the environment. So sorry to throw that little kind of bit in there, but I just wanted to share that with you all. But in terms of what you're saying, Roger, and I just want to say that I really appreciate the way you're presenting this. I'm finding it kind of what I've personally been wanting for a long time, some just real simple, clear explanations. So I really appreciate what you've yeah, I just really appreciate the way that you're delivering this. I think it's really valuable. In terms of the co-design, I'm really keen to work with you on that. And also I was thinking that we need to be really clear whether this is of value to do, because my feeling is that it might be quite painful and quite messy to actually get good at it. But it's a bit like teaching your kids to bake or something. It's just like, oh, why did I even do this? Like, it's such a mess in the kitchen. But at the end of the day, if they get good at it, then it's worth it. And I was thinking that a thought that I had about the co-design was that I think it's really important to look at how the council can support and empower the community to be able to even co-design, because if we can't even do that, then we can't really do it well together. So maybe rather than just expecting that we can do it, maybe to be able to put some support to the community to actually get good at it in the first place. And so it's kind of stepping back a little bit. I don't know if that makes sense to you. Yeah, and maybe the question is, could you actually even ask the community boards and the communities what co-design looks like for them? So, you know, I can see you've come up with your model and your ideas, which I think are really great. I'm going to look into that in detail. But I think it's, you know, if it is co-design we're talking about, it would be really great to actually ask, what does that look like for you? And yeah, and just in terms of just a little thing to throw in there, personally for me, I'm not actually really interested in delivering projects as a community board. That's just my own personal opinion, not the community board. But what I am interested in doing is the co-design, because I think that's where things will work. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
If you want to try and answer any part of that, Roger, go for it, other than the AUKUS.
Look, no, I think Gabrielle made some really good points, and you know, I'd agree with her in terms of, does everyone want to deliver projects? Probably not. Ultimately, delivering projects is working with contractors to physically build stuff. The co-design stuff happens really early on, where you create the idea, the need, the conversation around how could we make this a reality? Do we actually know what the scope of this thing is we're talking about? And getting it on the same page at that early stage, and then all agreeing on ultimately how are we going to move it forward, and where is our different roles in delivering it. And so, yeah, I think that diagram you'll see, it mentioned in the very first column, co-design, which was in that sort of ideation, working out, is this a good idea phase? That's where I think we can have most value in working together on that stuff. Engineers are good at putting tenders out and checking contractors and making sure health and safety, etc., is complied with, and actually finishing off the works. But I'm not sure if the majority of us are going to really add much value to that end of the process.
All right, thanks for that, Roger. Look, I've got Axel, Sue, and then Jackie.
Yeah, thank you, Marilyn. Yeah, thanks for that story too, Gabrielle. Very few orcas in Tamahere, unfortunately, but I got quite a lot of pleasure from seeing some eels in a
probably a few whales down there though.
Yeah, it's actually a project of that's come out of COVID, I suppose. 6 weeks at home with free teenage labour, and a local decided to clear a gully on the bottom of their property, which is really great. And that's a beautiful segue, Roger, into to the co-design, because I think that is the way forward. It will be painful. My observation, for what it's worth, is that the community not only is ready, but has been ready for quite some time. The learning will actually have to be also on the council side, how to step back, how to let go, you know, how to work out the things that they need to audit and keep control of, but more importantly, the bits that they need to let go of. So let's hold hands together and venture into this world, because we will not get from $20 to $40 million, or even $40 to $150 million worth of delivery unless it's by co-design. That's my feeling. And the great news, I guess, is from the experiences of the projects that work well, is that with co-design also comes money from other sources, and that's 145 million. Then doesn't have to be all of our money. So that's it's a really good model.
Good points, Axel.
Yeah. So
I'm really enjoying this presentation, Roger. Very, very well done. I just wanted to add regarding the co-design, I think it's really essential. And from the Tamahere point of view, with our local park being a very recent project that's still got a few things to evolve, we've had a subcommittee working with council staff and other stakeholders since probably about, we'd like to have said the beginning, but they didn't really want to talk to us much to start with. But as we moved through it, we were very involved, and we've felt that that's been a really good one for you to go back and have a look at. because the end result was really great. We've had a huge buy-in from the community, and it's also one where money is coming from the community to put the icing on the cake, shall we say. So I think that it's a no-brainer and will work very well if we can get the cohesiveness and the bringing in of people right from the start. And I'd suggest to community committees that they do set up a subcommittee, because the larger the people co-designing, the larger that group, the longer it'll take and the harder it'll be. So yeah, that's our experience. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
Totally agree with that last comment, Sue. Jackie.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Roger, I'd like to say that I think, okay, as governors of ratepayer money, we have to be and should be inherently conservative, and that's important. But we also have to have a risk appetite, and we've done a lot of work in terms of our council around what our risk appetite is. What I always think in the back of my mind is we actually have our biggest learnings from failure. We learn to walk by falling over, and we as a child, we fall, or baby, we fall over thousands of times before we learn to walk. And we don't want major failings, obviously, with ratepayer money, but we have to understand that we have a lot of learnings from failure. So I think you're quite hard on yourself. I think that projects don't always go to plan, and they don't always go even the most well-intended. So I think we learn a lot from what we perceive to be failures, where they're just really engagement and looking at alternatives. So yeah, I look forward to the continued journey. The other point which Gabriel put up, and I think I hold Raglan and Tamahiri particularly as places where they have an exceptional input with design and proactiveness around their vision for their communities. And they've got a lot of intellectual knowledge and property around how to do this project work in co-design. I feel in the North Waikato that I'm very proud of Mercer Community Committee, the Pocono Community Committee, and the Onewhia Tuakau Community Board for the same amounts of work, where we're learning at different rates of capacity around this co-design. And so the sharing of knowledge throughout the people who are doing it or have done it, if we build that capacity within our communities, and that's, I think, where we can take leadership as a council. Sure, some of them will be council projects, but others will be that we build the capacity for the communities to have their own projects, as I think Axel, you said as well, around their projects. We teach them how to use the fishing net. They would use that with council, but in other projects that have nothing to do with council, that we don't even have any delegations for, but builds that strength and sustainability. So in times like COVID, that building of that sustainability and that knowledge sharing across our wards, and also using expertise of council with those inbuilt failures or blips in the radar, I think are really key to it. And I found that you guys have done that really proactively. And I know that I've found across the wards that people are really willing, even on the Zoom, to share that knowledge. So I think that's a really good space that we're going into. It's now just to which projects can we do this co-design and learn together at different stages and share that intellectual property, but then you get on with the business as usual and just deliver the other projects that are already consulted and done. So I think you've done a really good job, and I think this is a absolutely forward-thinking progression, like the North Waikato ground. I think someone mentioned, sorry, I can't remember who, around like trails, like you talked about, Axel, around gullies. The North Waikato, we've got a huge trails which we partnered up with Waikato Tainui, with walking access, with Auckland City Council, Regional Council. It's a real partnership and community across community groups. And that's where that presentation will come through walking access into council to show how those community-led projects can be supported by council, but not always done by council, and funding may be part council or not, but into other funding and development opportunities. So I'm looking forward to that progress in this idea.
So just to make a comment there, the level of clarity you've just talked about, Councillor Church, if we had lists of projects where we were confident communities had said, just get on and deliver it because it's not rocket science and actually it's a pretty standard outcome that we're after here, compared to those ones which, no, we need to work very closely together because there's some nuances about these things that we need to work with you on. And so, look, I think we need to get to that level of clarity. I fully support it.
Sure. And I guess from what Gabriel said, I guess because we've been working in that space a lot in the north, and I know Sean here and Alan, would probably agree with me. I'm going to speak for you two guys, as I sometimes do, is that we would be really happy to have a little workshop or a subcommittee to actually have that dynamic input as to our collective.
Okay, Councillor, look, I need to move on. We're running out of time. I've still got one section to go. So I need to cut down on the comments and only stick to questions, please. Roger, I'll get you to go to move to the next section, please.
Righty. No, that's not the right one, is it? Just trying to find it. Hold on a second. It's hiding there somewhere in front of me.
I'm looking at it, Roger.
Oh, yeah. Okay. What I'll do is I'll cover this one, and then there's two final slides, and then we'll break again for the final questions. So, look, value for money. We've been talking a bit about that, and I think it's pretty important that we talk about some of the parameters that we all, the realities of life that we have to work within. So, why is procurement so important for us all? What are some of the principles that we need to follow when we are buying things? What's the framework that we're using as a council? What are some of the complexities we're finding along that way? And then I also just want to touch on, there's a whole range of national, regional and local initiatives happening at the moment that we just need to be aware of, because they potentially simplify the landscape, but also complicate it. And I'll explain what I mean there a bit later on. So look, why is procurement important? Well, ultimately, we need to maintain public trust and confidence. And the way we engage our contractors and spend public money, basically, we've got to do it right. And what we're finding is the Office of the Auditor General is focusing a lot on what we're doing. So they audit us regularly, and they want to make sure we're doing it right. And when I say regularly, they do their annual audit, but they come in there for their pre-audit discussions, etc. And they drill into things, whatever they want to across the business. And whenever they think something doesn't kind of look right, they'll dig and find out, well, what's going on here and why? Was the right process followed? So if these processes and procedures aren't well designed and managed, there's huge risk for fraud to occur. We've seen some of that happen in other councils. The Auckland Transport one was a classic example, when senior managers were taking backhanders from contractors, etc. There's just lots of examples. We could talk about them all day. Ultimately, what we need to do is we need to strike a careful balance between expediency of making things happen, but balancing the level of risk that we're prepared to take when we are engaging contractors and spending that money. So look, we don't have to be complicated about this. There's some basic principles that resonate really well with me. So we're really trying to plan and manage for great results. And so getting the right team involved early with the right experience, involving suppliers nice and early, and taking time to understand and scope the project, that's really important. We need to be fair to all our suppliers. We do need to create competition in the market. And we need to encourage the more capable ones, or all of them to be capable. We don't discriminate, and we are seeking opportunities to involve New Zealand suppliers of all sizes. So there's that local feel. We need to keep building on that. We also need to make sure we get the right supplier, and that we build fair and productive relationships with those. There's one particular supplier at the moment that we're working with who was going to do some toilet refurbishments for us. But ultimately, we've been working really hard to get them on board with the right health and safety plans. And it just hasn't worked. And so ultimately, we've had to part ways. But we do need to get the right relationships going with our suppliers. We also need to get the best deal for everyone. So best public value. And we've got to be accountable for the agreements that we reach, and we need to play by the rules. So be accountable, transparent, reasonable, and at the end of the day, we're spending the public purse, and that's really important. So what do we do here at council? I suppose there's a procurement framework that's currently being revamped, and it's being realigned to the Waikato LAS regional procurement framework. So we subscribe to a lot of the good things that LAS suggest we should be doing collectively, and this is one of them. And that new framework's based on the government procurement rules set by central government, obviously. So good procurement practices delivers other positive community outcomes as well, and they're sometimes termed as broader outcomes, such as reducing waste and supporting and developing local businesses. And so we need to, factor all of that in as well. So look, ultimately, we're trying to develop a better strategic approach to procurement and to deliver our CAPEX contracts to get the right outcomes in the right way, at the right time and at the right price. So there's a lot of work going on here. We talked about the recovery work that's happening. So there's a bit of an end-to-end process looking at how we deliver CAPEX, and obviously procurement is an important part of that process. So that's included in that review. Just touching on some of the complexities we face, there's definitely trade-offs between time, cost and quality, and working with the right people early on can help balance those three tensions or needs quite well. I mentioned it earlier that these projects we run are multidisciplinary across council, and procurement's no different. It involves whether it's the contracts team, the legal teams, or a harm team, and coordinating the inputs of all of those teams can be challenging, particularly where some of those teams are extremely busy with a whole range of other things. So we need to have a good look at that and make sure we can streamline it the best we can. One of the ways we're trying to do that is something called a procurement operations oversight meetings, where we pull all the right people into the room on a regular basis. It's a weekly basis, and we have a look at, well, what are we procuring at the moment? How are we doing it? What are the roadblocks? How can we get around some of those delays, etc., or avoid the delays? The other important thing to note is we've sort of decentralised procurement here at council. So we don't just have one person or one department procuring everything. We've basically said our project managers have a role to play in procuring the goods and services of the contractors. What we need those project managers to do is follow the right rules and the right systems and processes to ensure the outcomes that we all need to achieve are actually achieved. And at the moment, we've got a procurement team that supports each of those project managers and everyone who's procuring stuff. And we need to make sure, when I say a team, at the moment we've got one person in that role, we need to make sure we're well resourced in that area to support all our procurement initiatives. And so that's a work in progress as well. So just touching on the value for money stuff, I think we're all aware that central government's knowing about the funding issues and constraints that we face as districts, rural districts in particular, and ageing infrastructure. The problems with CAPEX delivery, it's not just us who struggle in this space, it's actually quite a few councils across the country don't routinely deliver their CAPEX programs. And part of the reason for that is the limited size of our construction industry and the number of tenders or lack of tenders we get for some of the work we put out. So there are several initiatives at all levels happening that it's important just to be aware of as we move into this next LTP. So just kind of broadly going across them, we've got the Provincial Growth Fund and Hamilton-Auckland Corridor project work. We've got the Hamilton Metro Spatial Plan stuff. We've got the Crown Infrastructure Partners, recent stimulus package requests. The same with the MHUD's Transformational Urban Growth Program. We've got roading corridor projects being run by MB and the RATA, the Road Asset Technical Accord. And we've got National Infrastructure Procurement Coordinated Delivery Initiatives, So it's a really busy national landscape in terms of looking at how do local government deliver stuff, how does it work with central government, where's the funding coming from, and there's all sorts of initiatives being rolled out all the time to try and streamline that. And so it's actually quite difficult as a business to keep abreast of all of those initiatives, link into them as we need to, and work out which ones are going to benefit our communities and which ones actually are not actually going to be that helpful for us given our unique situations. In terms of looking a bit more locally, we've got regional initiatives. Waikato LAS is obviously the way we try and coordinate the way we do things within our region. Future Proof is a main part of that in terms of the coordination. We've got the Professional Services Panel, which was a LAS initiative where we pre-select a whole bunch of contractors, put them through a rigorous selection process, and it's easier to engage a PSP contractor rather than someone who's not PSP approved. We've also got another latest initiative, the Coordinated Infrastructure Procurement Project. That's really saying all the local councils, high value, high risk water and roading projects, there could be a better way to deliver all of that as a package. Then we've also got the Roading Asset Technical Accord doing similar stuff. So again, regionally, there's a lot of initiatives. We know we've got issues as a local government sector, and there's a lot of work being put into trying to solve them. So locally, this council, what are we doing to try and improve things? We've got our Roading Alliance to try and deliver, we're trying to gear them up more to deliver more roading projects. We've obviously just entered into our water care partnership to deliver on more of our waters projects. That was the 72 odd mil, I think they are responsible for delivering. We do use the Professional Services Panel, that was the LAS initiative I mentioned, and we obviously have a pretty robust contract tendering process. So look, it is a very busy and complicated landscape that we work within. Second to last slide, Mary Ellen. So what have we talked about today? We're trying to clarify, document and better communicate our BAU and our levels of service. We want to engage with our communities on the levels of service, the cost implications of those and the choices around that in the LTP. We want to clarify our works program more than we have to date. We want to develop criteria to reprioritise it and develop future work programs with our key stakeholders, looking through all the current relevant lenses. We need to confirm what we really mean by co-design and how this can work in collaboration with our key stakeholders and community representatives, and we talked a bit about that. We need to reimagine the way we procure our professional services and deliver that whole CAPEX project portfolio more efficiently, leveraging off the skills, talent and enthusiasm in our communities. And we need to continue to work with government on the stimulus packages and the various delivery initiatives, because that's a way to get better value for money for our communities. So if we do all of that, then you would like to think that the delivery and maintenance of quality infrastructure and services is going to happen in a consistent, equitable, cost-effective and customer-focused manner. You'd like to think we'd be having close working relationships with our communities, which amongst other things develops and delivers a realistic and inspiring forward works program that meets their needs. You'd like to think we'll have quality AMPs which clearly outline the decisions made and the strategies that we've jointly developed to achieve the outcomes that we seek, and that hopefully we want to have easily accessible and quality information on what's happening in the communities in terms of BAU levels of service, and how we're going with the delivery of the works programs. So that's what me and my team and the organisation is working to achieve. Happy for questions. I'll jump out of this.
Thank you, Roger. Very, very good presentation. Look, we're really up with the end of time, but I'll take one or two late questions if anybody has any questions. I'm not seeing anybody indicating they want to. Councillor Church, question only, please, no statements.
Yes, district plan and Waikato 2070, how do they, could you just clarify how they fit into this plan? because you talked about local initiatives.
Yeah, look, ultimately, I keep talking about the recovery plan and how we're looking at end-to-end mapping. There's a couple of work streams. One is around CAPEX stuff. The other's around the broader planning life cycle of development. And that links into what you're just talking about in terms of our growth strategy, in terms of the rules we set around what happens in our district, how that then translates into our conversations with developers, and how we work with them to make their visions and dreams a reality. So there is a work stream that's looking at that end-to-end process. So it's definitely been bolted in, and we're reviewing what does all that look like in this new world that we're entering into.
Yeah, because obviously that flagged with the COVID, and then there's a lot of people around, the affordability going forward in terms of our rates, right? So yeah, big questions. Thank you.
Cheers, thanks for that, Jackie. Look, we probably need, last one, Deputy Mayor.
Just going to reinforce some of the comments I see on the side here, Roger. Good presentation, good approach to how we move forward, and I really think the co-design is going to be the fuel and the engine. So let's get on with it.
Yeah, look, good comments too. Look, just before I close this off, I just really want to thank you, Roger. I think this, I was probably a little bit apprehensive as to how we would do these workshops and how they would actually turn out doing these online. As you can imagine, I've done a lot of them in the chamber and in meeting rooms, but this is the first one I've ever done online. I've got to say my first experience has been a great experience, and I think that partly comes down to the quality of what you presented today and the fact that you were a very, very good presenter as well. So I just from me and from my team, I really want to thank you for that, because I think it goes a long way towards us supporting this approach. And just in saying that, I think I just want to sum it up. It is absolutely fantastic to see all our community board chairs and those relevant committee chairs that are actually sitting here today. I think it's the first time I've been able to get you all in a room together for us to play this part. And I actually think that I know we've got another workshop next Thursday in the afternoon. And I just think if this is the way it takes to get you all in the room to work with us, maybe this is the way we should continue on with these type of workshops, because I just think it is so positive to see and hear everybody. And I'm sorry, Gabrielle, you were waving to the orca and not waving to me, unfortunately. But in saying that, we all learn from using this, and it is important. But I just want to congratulate you, Roger, and your team for this presentation. I think it is very sobering. And I think the message I get out of this is we need to do more, but we need to empower our staff to actually just get on and do it. And I've always said that is what we should be doing. And if you want to slow anything up, just involve more people to have more input. And unfortunately, that's what happens with some community projects sometimes, and that's why they drag on. So look, just with that, I'll just sign off. I'll just give you a little bite on how difficult my job is. I got a message this morning from my son, who's sitting in the Hauraki Gulf fishing with two of his colleagues. He's a detective, so he's having a day off. And by 9:30, the three of them had their limits and nothing under 44 centimetres. So I'm incredibly envious of that position today. I'm peeved off that he's doing that and I'm not. So with that, we'll sign off, and I just want to thank everybody for participating, and I really, really do look forward to seeing you next Thursday. Fantastic.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, team.
Thanks, Roger. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Alan. That was great.
Thank you.
Hmm.